Hi everyone, welcome to the Lymphatic and Immune System lectures. I tagged these two lectures together as one because understanding the lymphatic system is definitely going to help us dive into the immune system, because the lymphatic system houses a lot of our immune cells like T cells and B cells, also known as lymphocytes, that have a huge role in the immune system function. So the way we're going to do this is we're first going to go over the lymphatic system, and then we're going to tie it into the immune system and spend the rest of this PowerPoint on immune system. So the lymphatic system, it's like a circulatory system, but instead of circulating blood, we're circulating a fluid called lymph. So the cardiovascular circulatory system goes from arterioles to capillary beds, where it exchanges fluids with the tissues surrounding them. And anything that doesn't get used or that's a waste goes into the venule to go to the vein and go back up and circulate throughout the body. Now, alongside that cardiovascular circulatory system, you have a lymphatic system. Those are these green vessels here. And if you notice, the green vessels, they're not circulating. They simply start with the nub end at all of your capillary beds, and they collect fluids from those tissues that are around capillary beds, and they move that lymphatic fluid all the way back up towards your heart to mix the fluid back in with the blood. Now, you might be wondering, well, if we allow nutrients and fluids to leave the capillary system and that same volume to come back, what else is the lymphatic vessel collecting? Well, because we're not perfect beings, sometimes if you, let's say, diffuse out 3 milliliters of fluid into the tissues, you only really collect back 2.5 mils. That 0.5 mils doesn't get collected back into the blood vessel. Instead, it's going to be collected back into the lymphatic system. This is almost like your backup system to collect any fluids, any waste that was left behind by the capillary bed in the tissues. Imagine if you didn't have a lymphatic system. Every time you brought nutrients and fluids to your tissues and you took the waste back, you would be accumulating a certain volume of waste, fluids, salts in the tissues, ultimately leading to swelling of those tissues, and we usually call that edema. So really, the lymphatic system is there to pick up any left behind salts, fluids, bacteria, pathogens, cancerous cells, put them back into the lymphatic system, circulate them all the way around your body, and dump it back into your circulatory system to mix back with blood. So, what are some of the main functions? Well, I already covered fluid recovery. It recovers any left behind fluid that's still in the tissues to make sure that we put it back into our cardiovascular system. The second big function is immunity. The immunity function of the lymphatic system helps you to pick up pathogens, like we said, cancerous cells, bacteria, and it takes those up and filters them through lymph nodes before putting it back into your blood circulation. We'll talk more about this a little bit later, but for now just know that the lymphatic system, when it's over here, it doesn't just pick up extra fluids and salts and waste. It also picks up any kind of bacteria or virus that could be in the tissues infecting them. The last one, we covered this in the digestive system, was lipid absorption. The specialized lymphatic capillaries that pick up fat are called lacteals. And lacteals pick up fat from inside the villi of the small intestine, and they move that fat throughout the lymphatic system until they dump it right back up into your heart. Today, we'll also look at the pathway of the lymph fluid so you can see exactly where it dumps back into your heart. Now, a few components of the lymphatic system. You've got the fluid inside of it. You call that lymph. It is clear, it is colorless, and it's almost like plasma. Then you have the lymphatic capillaries and lymphatic vessels. These lymph capillaries are what pick up the fluid at your blood capillary beds. Lymphatic vessels transport it. Lymph tissues. You can also have clusters of lymphatic tissue in different areas of your body, and we'll talk about that. And then the last thing is lymphatic organs. Lymph organs are usually going to be areas where you have concentrated lymphatic cells. So we'll start by talking about the lymphatic capillaries. And the lymphatic capillaries are going to be kind of like the blood capillaries, where they're single cell layered thick to make it easy for things to diffuse into them. Now remember, lymph capillaries, their job is to pick up fluids, salts, excess waste, and pathogens into them. You are not diffusing anything out of lymph capillaries. They are just there to pick up extra fluid that's left behind in the tissues. So the lymph capillaries are made of a single cell layered thick endothelium. And this is where you pick up a lot of the fluid from the tissues and you bring it in through these little flap-like openings. And when you bring it into the flap-like openings, you see this internal lining here. This creates what's called a valve. Just like the valves in your veins and the valves in your heart, these valves prevent backflow so that lymphatic fluid can flow in a single direction. Now you can find lymphatic capillaries all over your body except for central nervous system, cartilage, which is avascular anyways, the cornea in your eye, bone, and bone marrow. Now, from the lymph capillaries, you picked up the extra fluid, you picked up the pathogens, whatever it is that you picked up, and you move that fluid from capillaries into larger vessels called collecting lymph vessels. Next to this word, I want you to write the words lymph node. So we're going to just get a pen and I'm going to just put a blank here. Go ahead and write the word lymph node into this blank. Along the collecting lymph vessels is where you'll find lymph nodes. So let's say this is a collecting lymph vessel. It's just a vessel that has lymph in it. Alongside of them, you're going to have these clusters called lymph nodes. And lymph nodes are what filters the lymph fluid, making sure that there's nothing pathogenic or destructive to your body. The collecting lymph vessels will then converge to make lymph trunks. And you've got 6 of them. I will give you the names of all these. The 6 lymph trunks from the 6 main regions of your body will converge together to make lymph ducts. And there's only 2 of those. Lymph duct number 1 is called the right lymphatic duct. This duct is going to get all the lymph from the right arm, the right side of the head, and the thorax. The thoracic duct is going to collect lymph from a much larger area, and it's going to collect it from the diaphragm region, left arm, left side of the head, neck, and thorax. The thoracic duct, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but it's going to converge a lot of the lymph fluid that's collected from your legs in this region called the cisterna chyli. I do have an illustration of this whole chunk coming up, so I will go through this all again, pointing everything out to you. The lymph ducts, the 2 of them, there's one on the left side, one on the right side. They're going to empty into the subclavian veins. Remember, these are underneath your clavicles. And the subclavian veins converge to make your superior vena cava, and that eventually dumps into your right atrium. So it is here, at this location, that lymph mixes back with your blood. So I really like this illustration because it shows you, number 1, that the lymphatic circulation runs alongside your cardiovascular circulation, starting at the capillary beds and moving its way up to the collecting lymph vessels, where you see the lymph nodes there. And then collecting lymph vessels make collecting lymph trunks, and then that turns into the collecting lymph duct. Now, if you recall, the duct is what converges with the subclavian vein to dump that lymph fluid into your circulatory system. From the subclavian vein, we go to the superior vena cava and back down into the heart to be pumped through the rest of the body. We collect lymph fluid from your systemic circuit as well as from your pulmonary circuit. Now, if you look at this illustration of this man, you see that you have clusters of lymph nodes in specific places like the popliteal region. You have them in the axillary region and in the cervical region. This is where doctors often check for swollen lymph nodes because cervical lymph nodes are pretty superficial and you can feel when they're swollen by simply touching the region under your mandible for them. Now, how does lymph actually flow through your body? So how do you get lymph, let's say, to flow from your legs back up to your heart? Well, you don't have a pump connected to it, like a heart or anything like that. So you need to find other mechanisms to make sure lymph flows up and doesn't fall back down. Number one way of moving lymph is using what's called a skeletal muscle pump. So let's say you have a muscle that's held on by a tendon and it's not very contracted, nice and long and not too bulky. Now, when you contract this muscle, it shortens and it becomes a lot more bulky. Alongside muscles, you have lymphatic vessels. Every time a skeletal muscle contracts and pumps outward, it pushes onto vessels that are next door to it, creating pressure on them to propel the lymph upward. So by contracting skeletal muscle, the skeletal muscle bulges out, pushing on neighboring lymphatic vessels, creating pressure in that lymphatic vessel, pushing the blood and lymph up. Now it does this for lymph and for blood vessels as well, but it has the greatest effect on your lymphatic vessels. So this means the more you exercise, the more you contract your skeletal muscle, the better lymphatic flow you're going to have. The second method of lymph flow is with arterial pulsation. When your arteries pulse with that high pressure blood, again, it causes the arteries to slightly expand, pushing on neighboring lymphatic vessels, causing the lymph to move up in the direction again. The last thing is the valves, and this is not to pump the lymph fluid through, but it's to prevent backflow of lymph fluid. So once you get lymph fluid from your toes up to your knees, you don't want that lymph to fall back down to your toes. So you have valves in the lymphatic vessels that prevent backflow. Now, in terms of lymph organs and tissues, we're going to cover a few lymph organs, and I've classified them into primary and secondary lymphatic organs. Primary lymphatic organs, there's only two of them, and they're called primary because these are the two places where you allow your two major lymphocytes to mature. Lymphocytes are cells of the lymphatic system. Two of the major lymphocytes are T cells and B cells. These lymphocytes live in the lymphatic system, but they have a huge role in the immune system. So primary lymphatic organs include the red bone marrow and the thymus. Now, write this down because I'd like you to know these details. The red bone marrow produces B cells and T cells. So it makes both of these cells. And these cells are called lymphocytes. They are also classified as white blood cells. So the red bone marrow makes B cells and T cells, and it ships the T cells out to the thymus to mature, and it keeps the B cells in the bone marrow to mature. Hence the name B and T. B indicates bone marrow, T indicates thymus. So the places that they mature are where these letters are from, but where they are produced is in the red bone marrow. So T and B cells, what I mean by mature is that these two cells, either B goes to the bone marrow or T goes to the thymus. And during the maturation process, really what it consists of is making sure that the T and B cells are prepared to fight off infection and not to attack your own tissues. When you have immune cells attacking your own body, it's considered having an autoimmune disorder. So the maturation process is just to ensure that the B and T cells mature properly and that they're not attacking your own body, but rather they're prepared to attack bacteria, pathogens, and other viruses. Secondary lymphatic organs include lymph nodes, tonsils, and spleen. Once you create mature T and B cells, those T and B cells travel to their homes. Lymph nodes, tonsils, and spleen are the housing facilities of mature T and B cells. And those T and B cells just hang out in these secondary lymphatic organs, and they wait for your body to have an immune response, and then they go out into your circulation to fight off whatever pathogen was encountered. Now, we're going to focus on the secondary lymphatic organ called lymph node. This looks like a kidney, but it's not a kidney. It's a lymph node. And the lymph node has two major vessels, the incoming vessels and the outgoing vessels. The incoming vessels are called afferent lymphatic vessels. They bring lymphatic fluid into the lymph node. And the efferent lymphatic vessel brings cells and fluid out of the lymph node. Now, your next question might be, well, why do you need this whole lymph node system? Why can't you just go bypass it and just keep flowing through? Well, the purpose of a lymph node is to cleanse the lymph fluid and to monitor it for any kind of pathogen. So let's say you have a tissue, and I'm going to draw this out. You have a tissue here, and the lymphatic capillary comes and picks up the lymph fluid, and I'm just going to connect it here. So you pick up extra fluids, salts, some proteins, and maybe a bacteria. You move that lymph fluid through the capillary to the collecting lymph vessel, which moves that lymph fluid and filters it in through the lymph node. If there is a bacteria in the lymph fluid, that bacteria will eventually get into the lymph node for filtration. That bacteria in the lymph node is going to elicit an immune system response. Why? Because remember, the lymph node houses mature T and B cells. T and B cells are two of the major cells of your immune system. If these T and B cells here in pink and blue say, oh my gosh, this is a bacteria, this is not normal in our bodies, the T and B cells will activate themselves to start an immune response, and they'll start proliferating and dividing and dividing and dividing, and maybe 100 T or B cells can turn into 1,000,000. And those T and B cells will then go on the hunt. They'll leave out of the efferent lymph vessel, and they'll go and circulate to the rest of your body to start attacking bacteria or pathogens that are not supposed to be there. So really, this whole lymph node is there to filter and clean the lymph fluid, identify any pathogens, proliferate the army of T and B cells, and send that army out to the rest of the body. Eventually, it'll go into your circulation, which means it's going to get to all your tissues, and you're going to be able to create a nice body-wide immune system response. Now the spleen, this guy right over here, you only have one of them. It is in your upper left quadrant of the abdominal region, and the spleen is your largest lymphatic organ, again housing a ton of T and B cells. The spleen is divided into two regions, a region that's more red and a region that's lighter in color. The more red region is called the red pulp, and it's red because it's made out of erythrocytes. This is where you store a lot of red blood cells, and this is also considered the graveyard of red blood cells. When erythrocytes get older and die, they go into the spleen to get degraded and then recycled. The white pulp is considered white, although in real life it's not white. It's a much lighter pink color. And it's made up of lymphocytes, macrophages, and this is where we house the T and B cells. So the spleen is dual function. It has to do with erythrocytes as well as leukocytes, your white blood cells. Now, to touch back onto lymph nodes, just a little bit of information about cancer and lymph nodes. If you have ever known someone who's had cancer, they oftentimes do biopsies of the lymph nodes that are around the area of the tumor, because what they're looking for is to see if the cancer has metastasized. That means it has spread from the region where the tumor was out to the rest of your body, where it can lodge into any other area and begin a new tumor there. So they go surgically, they take a few lymph nodes, and they test the lymph nodes to see if there's any cancerous cells inside. Because if cancerous cells can get into your lymph node, where can the lymph nodes send those cancerous cells to? Well, remember, the lymph nodes are in the collecting lymph vessels. Collecting lymph vessels will converge into lymph trunks, and then the lymph trunks will go into lymph ducts. And where does the lymph duct empty? It goes right back into your heart and gets pumped everywhere in your body. So, understanding the function and flow of lymph fluid is important to understanding diseases like cancer. Then you got the lymph tissue that's a tonsil. The tonsils are going to be kind of in the oropharynx, nasopharynx region. You do have three main sets of them. You've got palatine tonsils, which are going to be in your palate region. So this is your tongue. The palatine region is going to be on the sides, to the left and the right of the uvula. So that little dangly guy is the uvula. Palatine tonsils are the left and right. These are pretty easy to see if you look in the mirror. Then you got the lingual tonsils. Those are way in the back of your tongue. You may be able to see these if you stick your tongue out long enough. And then you've got the pharyngeal tonsils. These guys are up in the pharyngeal region. And these guys are probably more difficult for you yourself to see. And they will also swell during a bacterial infection. So these three tonsils are in this opening for two main reasons. Number one, the food that you eat is not always clean. When you ingest food that has bacteria in it, that can cause activation of T and B cells stored in tonsils. Number two, the air that you breathe, especially right now, is not clean. So if you breathe in dirty air through your nose, we're going to activate the pharyngeal tonsils. If you breathe it in through your mouth, we can activate the lingual and palatine tonsils. And when I say activate, I mean activate the T and B cells in those tissues to start immune responses.